want to now bring in former CIA director and NBC News senior national security analyst, John Brennan. And I actually want to take a turn. I want to focus on this Washington Post report this morning about Iran and the aggressive nature about going after dissidents. We know they've been going after people in the Trump administration. John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, both still have to have extra security due to the supposed what they want to do in revenge for the Soleimani targeting. What is that threat level in your mind? We know the Iranians want to be aggressive. How much fear should we have about this?
Well, I think Iran is still the world's premier state sponsor of terrorism, and there have been a number of plots that have been uncovered where the Iranians are trying to go after dissidents, kill them or bring them back, but also go after U.S. officials. And so I do think that there's a fair amount of operational activity taking place in the Iranian services, whether it be the Quds Force or the intelligence service. And whether or not this is something that is being done as revenge for the killing of Qasem Soleimani, or this is just an effort on the part of the Iranian regime more broadly, and the leadership in particular, to try to address any type of criticisms that are coming from individuals abroad in terms of Iranian exiles, as well as to retaliate against their perceived enemies.
Are we getting to the point where we shouldn't be at the table with Iran anymore over the nuclear deal?
Well, I think that the prospects of renewing the Iranian nuclear deal are slim, and they're becoming, I think, more and more limited as time goes on in light of what's going on in Iran. But I do think it's important for the United States to participate in efforts to try to ensure that we stop the Iranian nuclear weapons program in its tracks, and to see what opportunities there might be to be able to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state. So therefore, I don't think we should shut off all of those discussions, but at the same time, I think we have to be realistic about what is achievable, particularly under the current Iranian regime.
Yesterday, I focused on both of the protest movement growing in Iran, the protest movement growing in China. It's pretty obvious China's probably going to shut down this movement somewhat successfully. But Iran, this feels as if this regime is as vulnerable as it's been since its founding in 1979. A, do you concur with that? And B, if that's the case, what should we in the West be doing here other than supporting the protesters?
Well, first of all, in China, I think although Xi Jinping is a stubborn individual, I do think he is also pragmatic. And so I think there's going to be a combination of repression and suppression of the protests and demonstrations, as well as a relaxation of some of these COVID protocols that really have stimulated these protests. In Iran, I do think the Iranian leadership is quite concerned that these demonstrations, the most serious in many years, could in fact gain additional steam and momentum. And so I think they will be resorting increasingly to repressive tactics. We have had many, many hundreds of Iranians who have been killed. There are thousands who have been incarcerated. And these demonstrations are distributed pretty widely across Iran. They're not really coordinated. They're spontaneous. There's no real leadership or leadership in exile like you had in the late 70s under Ayatollah Khomeini. So I do think that the hill is rather steep for these Iranian demonstrators to climb if they have hopes of really making change in the Iranian political structure. But I don't think that they are going to just peter out completely. But I do think that there's going to be increasing clashes and unfortunately bloodshed on the streets of Iran.
What would you want the West to be doing here?
I think we want to be speaking out as forcefully as we can against the Iranian repressive measures and these lethal actions that they're taking. I do think we have to continue to put pressure on some of those countries that continue to have a relationship with Iran and to see whether or not the Chinese, and we see what is happening now with Putin and Russia, they have in fact strengthened the relationship with Iran significantly. But I do think that there needs to be more and more international outrage over what's going on inside of Iran. We have to be careful not to be seen as trying to manipulate the situation so that we, in fact, are engineering some type of coup or change. But I do think what we need to do is to use our voice and our soft power as much as we can to encourage others to tell the Iranians that Iranian regime that this is unacceptable.
Right, but sometimes our fear of looking like of being blamed to be instigators, sometimes we create even more hesitation. I mean, I think back to 2009 and the Green Revolution, and I think even in hindsight, you were part of that. In hindsight, I think now there was some wish that we among others should have spoken out more forcefully. No.
Yeah, and it is a delicate balance, but I would be on the side of encouraging more and stronger language against Iran, and also to be more sympathetic, outwardly so and explicitly so, with the demonstrators as a way to send a signal inside of Iran that those who are opposed to the regime have a lot of supporters on the outside, including the United States. I think it's important for us to be able to send that signal without provoking even greater bloodshed. But unfortunately, I think the Iranian story is one that is going to have greater instability in the future.
Should we open our doors temporarily to any Iranian dissident who needs safe haven?
I wouldn't say any Iranian dissident, but I do think what we have to do is to use whatever avenues there might be to try to build those bridges with Iranian dissidents, exile groups, and others, and using intelligence as well as law enforcement and diplomatic channels to reach out. I do think that there's an opportunity here that we need to seize.
John Brennan, there's a lot more I'd love to ask you about, but I have the tyranny of time, unfortunately, on my side. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on and sharing your perspective.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.